for the bark of the central banker. The chairman of the U.S. Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, has insisted he'll remain in office despite the threat of criminal charges against him from the Department of Justice. In a video message, Mr. Powell revealed that the Trump administration has opened a criminal investigation and threatened him with charges over testimony he gave to Congress about a building renovation project. In an unusually blunt statement, Mr. Powell accused the White House of using the justice system to intimidate the central bank. He said the Justice Department had served a legal notice ordering the Federal Reserve to hand over documents relating to cost overruns at its Washington headquarters. Mr. Powell insists the investigation is a pretext and that the real issue is the Fed's refusal to cut interest rates as sharply as the president wants. Donald Trump has repeatedly threatened to fire the Fed chief when the central bank has, in his view, moved too slowly to lower rates. Well, we're hoping to hear a clip from Mr. Powell there, but if we get it in time, we'll still play it as we move along. But for more on this, I'm joined now on the line from New York by Arise Special Correspondent James Blue. Good to see you, James. And Jerome Powell has long been in President Trump's firing line, hasn't he? Explain the context of what's going on now, because Mr. Powell seems to be involved in a quite extraordinary and very unusual public and legal battle with Mr. Trump.
Yes, it is a quite extraordinary event, Charles. And what you have is the president trying to control the central bank. As you know, the central bank sets interest rates, which really kind of guides the economy. And his goal is to make the economy, make things as affordable as possible, and to really support full employment. And sometimes that goes against the wishes of the president. The president has wanted interest rates lowered repeatedly, and he said so since the beginning. And Mr. Powell and the Fed chairs have only recently begun lowering those rates. The president would like them to be lowered more quickly and more substantially, and Fed Chair Powell has refused. And so for a very long time, President Trump has indicated his desire to replace the Fed chair. And he is now going after him with this legal issue over cost overruns related to the construction of the Fed headquarters. You can see there, that is a picture of President Trump nominating Fed Chair Powell. Trump often likes to suggest that Powell wasn't his choice, but it certainly was his choice. And he's just disagreeing with the man who is carrying out and responsible for fiscal policy. This really goes to the heart of the question: who controls things? How powerful is the president? And is the president able to, at a whim, decide he does not want the Fed chair to stay in office? The president has picked someone to replace him. He's someone who served in the first Trump administration as an economic advisor. He is currently in the administration in a similar role. Kevin Hassett, he is a former professor at Columbia University Business School. He has worked in banking and is very respected, but a lot of people think that he would be much more influenced by President Trump's wishes than the Fed Chair Powell has been. The dispute and the potential legal dispute are related to cost of renovating the Fed Chair building. The Federal Reserve is one of the oldest buildings in Washington. It is not very accessible, and so they were doing a lot of work to update the building, and there have been some cost overruns. Right. And so it seems as though the president is trying to use the testimony that Powell gave to Congress as the indicator that he was lying to Congress and therefore misleading them and therefore should be fired.
Right.
One last thing. Powell is scheduled to end the chairmanship this spring, I think in May. However, he would remain on the board for another, I believe, 4 years. And so I think what President Trump is trying to do is to get him out of the Federal Reserve completely and not have him stick around once his chair replacement is confirmed. But this is unprecedented, and specifically, I hope we can get a clip. The way in which Chairman Powell has responded, labeling Trump's move and the Justice Department move as political and as out to get him for reasons that have nothing to do with the alleged crime.
Right.
Charles?
Well, thanks for that. You've kind of answered all the questions that were put there for the interview. But stay with us because we've got that clip now. Let's hear from Jerome Powell and we'll come back to you.
No one, certainly not the chair of the Federal Reserve, is above the law. But this unprecedented action should be seen in the broader context of the administration's threats and ongoing pressure. This new threat is not about my testimony last June or about the renovation of the Federal Reserve buildings. It is not about Congress's oversight role. The Fed, through testimony and other public disclosures, made every effort to keep Congress informed about the renovation project. Those are pretexts. The threat of criminal charges is a consequence of the Federal Reserve setting interest rates based on our best assessment of what will serve the public, rather than following the preferences of the president. This is about whether the Fed will be able to continue to set interest rates based on evidence and economic conditions, or whether instead monetary policy will be directed by political pressure or intimidation.
And that's the Fed chair, Jerome Powell. And of course, our special correspondent, James Blue, is still with us. Have you ever seen Jerome Powell in such fighting form? Because, I mean, during the last year and a half, when he's been under attack from the president, he's generally tried to maintain a dignified silence and not directly respond, saying that he didn't want to get into mudslinging with President Trump because he felt that that would damage the Fed. So has the moment come when he crossed the Rubicon, as it were?
Yes, I think he has crossed the Rubicon. And I think what the Fed chair has done quite well is in public, he has really sort of maintained his composure, maintained respect, and really maintained the dignity and decency of the office. He hasn't wanted to do anything that would impact the markets or in any way sort of cause people to question his ability to serve as the Fed chair. I think with the investigation that the Trump administration has launched, he is now really understanding that this could happen, indictments could come. And so it's very important for him to really say, no one is above the law, no one has any right to be prosecuted for things that just simply aren't true and aren't fact, and the real motive is political. And so I think the situation has changed, and he's really changing the tactics that he feels are necessary. And I think that is going to really be an indicator of just how important he thinks this is. He believes people have to stand up to President Trump. They have to stand up to false prosecutions and fake investigations. And all of the work that he did previously in quiet, away from cameras, behind the scenes, have not done anything to sort of stop the Trump administration's desire to make this change. I think it's very important to note that Chairman Powell has really tried in a number of ways, I'm told, to kind of really meet the president and help, get this resolved. And when I say meet the president, sort of meet what some of the president's needs are. But he really believes in the independence of the Fed, and he believes that independence is being challenged by this suit. And I think that is one of the reasons for the changed actions.
And this appears to be, doesn't it, another example of Donald Trump aggressively using the criminal justice system to target opponents. I mean, might the pressure work? I mean, we've seen, Jerome in fighting form, Jerome Powell, but might he bend when faced with a lawsuit?
Well, I think because the justice system here it's not just the Justice Department. If the case moves forward, it would have to go to a grand jury. The grand jury would have to decide to indict. And, I think the real issue is whether there was malice and and real ill content by Chairman Powell when he testified. And I think it's very hard to understand or believe that someone of his stature would knowingly mislead Congress. Have there been cost overruns? Absolutely. Are those cost overruns directly related to bringing the Fed building up to code and doing the things in the building that need to be done in order for it to sort of actually operate as a modern office? Those things are all true. And I believe that the chairman recognizes the president is in a very, very particular place right now with the success of the Venezuela operation, with the sort of raising fist with Greenland and Denmark, the sort of NATO under threat, his pledge to potentially strike in Iran. I believe he recognizes that the situation and the ground has shifted, and therefore his sort of quiet efforts to kind of heat this off, which did work last year, he's still Fed chair, are no longer enough. And I think that's one of the reasons you see this very aggressive video. And what I believe you will see is a campaign to sort of discredit the efforts of the Justice Department. This is another example of really targeted investigations of people perceived to be enemies of the president. That includes the former FBI director, James Comey, the New York Attorney General, Letitia James. To that list, we can add Jerome Powell. The previous two cases have sort of fizzled into nothing at the moment. I think Chairman Powell is hopeful that this will fizzle as well, but he's not taking any chance or any risk, and that is why he's mounting this public effort to try to discredit it.
And interestingly, James, Donald Trump himself was asked by US media about this case brought by the Department of Justice shortly after the news broke, and he said he didn't know anything about it. What's your reading of that?
Well, yeah, he didn't know anything about it. And, he wasn't particularly friendly with Jeffrey Epstein or on the plane. I mean, I just think it's another instance where President Trump is just so challenged. I mean, it's very clear he's made this a political and a financial goal of his administration. And I think it's very hard to believe that he knew nothing of the Justice Department investigation. I mean, it's possible, but I think it's very, very doubtful.
Right. James, I'm afraid you're going to stick with us for a bit longer because, I mean, we value your analysis and your knowledge of all the different things happening in America. So just stay with us while I read this intro and come back to you in 1 second. The U.S. Homeland Security Secretary says hundreds more federal agents are being sent to the city of Minneapolis, where an immigration enforcement officer shot a woman dead on Wednesday. The city has seen repeated protests calling for enforcement agents to leave since the killing of Renee Good. Local officials have denied the Trump administration's claim she posed a threat to the officer. Demonstrations have spread from Minneapolis to major cities like Philadelphia, New York, and Washington. 2 other people were shot by Border Patrol agents in Portland on Wednesday. And James Blue is still with us. Well, what's the latest on those protests, James?
Well, the protests continue, and I think one of the things that we're beginning to learn this morning, there was a very good interview with the chief of police in Minneapolis. And what he's saying is that the city was not prepared for these kind of raids. And perhaps they needed the element of surprise. But when you are sort of going into a place, he said the general protocol is that you prepare the ground, you get people ready, you sort of do the things that sort of allow you to do things peacefully and with less reaction and response. And that was a really good insight, saying that the ICE agents had not done that. This is becoming one of those issues in this country where, depending on how you view that videotape, will really determine how you believe things can or should go on. If you believe that these raids are bad, you probably see the video as evidence that this was not a officer under assault. If you think the raids are good, you probably see that video as exactly that, someone using a car as a weapon. I think what this exposes is the way in which the Trump administration is demonstrating immigration was their biggest issue, demonstrating that they are still on the case doing the things that they need to do. There's been a lot of criticism about Trump's vision and view of doing all these global things. And so I think we're seeing this big effort in Minnesota to really reassure people that immigration remains an issue. Immigration is something that can be fought, and we can take people out of the country. Charles, there's another issue which I think is right under the surface, specifically in Minnesota. There was a very large Somali community in Minnesota, the largest community outside of Somalia. And there have been a number of investigations and actual convictions of people fraudulently using the social services system to defraud and get money for in a fraudulent way. I think that has stoked up a lot of anger and upset about that community. And I think one of the reasons the ICE raids in Minnesota was a response to the uncovering of this fraud. I should say that most of the Somalis in Minnesota are U.S. citizens, but I think that was sort of the context and the pretext of what and why they decided to go into Minnesota. And so as a result, you have this real cauldron of tension, both the Somali upset over the fraud and now the unfortunate death of a bystander who was trying to get away. And so those are sort of the ways in which these tensions are playing out. I think the biggest issue that we really need to sort of look for the arrival of more troops into Minnesota, more ICE agents, and what will that do in terms of actually increasing tensions. Finally, Charles, 5 years ago, in just a few blocks from where this killing took place, was the Floyd death and murder, the George Floyd. And that, I think, is still very much sort of present in the atmosphere. And so because of all of that, you have protests locally, you have protests around the country, and it's very hard to understand how it's going to resolve.
James, thank you very much indeed. You're an absolute star. James Blue is Arise special correspondent. He was talking to me on the line there from New York.